Welcome, friend, to Life and Liberty Radio. I'm David Householder, here to encourage your pursuit of happiness. You and I are partners, exploring our shared spiritual journeys. Together, we're dreaming and working for a free society. Tell others today about our adventure in faith and freedom. So breathe in, open your mind, lift up your spirit. Let's get started. So how do we overcome cowardice? How do we move from fragility to fortitude? This is part 2 of 2 of an expose, so to speak, or an explanation of an ancient story from over 30 centuries ago. The story of Gideon. Gideon was a coward, to review, and the messenger of God, or the message of God, the Creator, came to him and said, "Mighty warrior, you're going to save your people." He says, "I can't do that. I'm kind of a fraidy cat." And basically, he was continuing to shake in his boots the whole time. And after this encounter with the messenger from God, he says in Judges 6 from the Bible, Judges 6, chapter 6, verse 22, when Gideon realized that it was the angel of the Lord, he cried out, "O sovereign Lord, I'm doomed. I've seen the angel of the Lord face to face." "It's all right," the Lord replied. "Do not be afraid. You will not die." So here's Gideon. He's a natural coward. He doesn't want to face his enemies, the Midianites, the enemies of his nation, the people who are oppressing them. So he built an altar to the Lord, and he was told then, in another message, to go and tear down his father's religious symbols. Now, his father in the town had an altar to a god named Baal, B-A-A-L, and a pole to Asherah. And this was typical Canaanite folk religion at the time, and just as typical as seeing a Methodist church for them or anything else. This was classic religion for people, something they were used to, something they were comfortable with. And he was told, go tear it down. Now, what's with that? Is God anti-religious? Well, the truth is he is. And what do I mean by that? God is the creator. God is beyond symbols. The minute we start to nail down exactly how God is, that's the minute we fall into error. God is beyond all of our understanding, but certainly someone we can communicate with, someone who communicates with us. And so I don't want to just say that God is so out there that we can't possibly get anything out of a relationship with God. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that our thinking about God when we're apart from God is kind of useless. But we create these patterns, and these patterns themselves become holy. And those patterns, over time, take on a life of their own. And this can happen in any faith system. This can happen in Hinduism, this can happen in Christianity, this can happen in Judaism, this can happen in Islam, this can happen in any faith system where the symbols take on a life of their own. And when the symbols take on a life of their own, guess what you don't need? You don't need a living God. You don't need a living creator. And it's much more comfortable that way, because then you don't have to you don't have to deal with a God who's going to mess with you. And God does mess with us. And if you've got a living relationship with your Creator, you know that He messes with you. And it's much simpler just to create a flowchart about how God's supposed to be, an image, a picture, so to speak, and then we can just live with that picture and control that picture. Human religion is, in all of its isms, all of its forms, is a way to try to control God and then have fun with the pattern and pretend it's God. Well, when we pretend a pattern is God, there's a word for that. It's called an idol. And before this coward, Gideon, could go do his big work, the first thing he needed to do was to get rid of the idol and to deal with God as a living being, a God with whom we can have a relationship, and we call that relationship prayer. and receiving the promptings that God gives to us. So the more we can keep images away from that, the purer our relationship with God will be. In fact, one of the commandments that Moses gives to the people of Israel is that you shall make no graven images. Now, you can turn that commandment itself into a formalistic pattern. Well, we're going to go around and we're going to see if there's any pictures of God in this house. So let's get rid of all this any religious imagery. Let's rip it apart. But the truth is, that doesn't even do the trick. The main thing is to establish a relationship with your Creator and to cultivate it. Before I did anything this morning, I did that. I was kneeling in my office, and I completely opened up my heart to the Creator, and I did not impose my thinking on God. I just allowed God to work on me, and my breathing changed, and my attitude changed, and my operating system shifted over into a different way of being. But if I go to God with a pattern, the truth is you can pray to a pattern too, and it doesn't work very well. It's better to pray directly to the Creator. So before he could do anything, Gideon had to get rid of the idols. Now, the people in town said, "This is terrible. He must die for destroying the altar of Baal and for cutting down the Asherah pole." But hey, Joash, a relative, shouted to the mob who confronted him, "Why are you defending Baal? Will you argue his case? Whoever pleads his case will be put to death by morning. If Baal truly is a god, let him defend himself and destroy the one who broke down this altar." From then on, Gideon was called Jerubbaal, which means let Baal defend himself, because he broke down Baal's altar. The truth is, a pattern can't defend itself. And when people criticize religion and say, well, this pattern, it can't do anything, I'm going to stand here and see if this pattern does anything. The truth is, idols don't do anything. You can push it over and it'll fall over if it's a statue. We can't focus on the images. I don't want to get all legalistic about saying we can't have a cross in the house, or you can't have any spiritual images, or you can't light a candle, or any of that. That's missing the point. The point is you are a living being, and so is the Creator. And until you establish that relationship, you will never overcome cowardice. Have you read The Blackberry Bush? At the moment the Berlin Wall falls, a boy and a girl are born on opposite sides of the world. Do they share a destiny? Do we all share the same destiny? Come on a treasure hunt through the landscape of your soul. BlackberryNovel.com. So now we come to the climax of the story. We met Gideon, who was a coward. The first thing he had to do was to get rid of images and establish a real relationship with God. And we find out that indeed happened. He pulled down the altar of Baal, which was an image, an idol, and the Asherah pole. And soon afterwards, the armies, the enemies of Gideon, amassed against Israel. And in verse 14, then, chapter 6, it says, "Then the Spirit of the Lord took possession of Gideon." The Ruach, Spirit, Yahweh of the Lord. The Ruach Yahweh took possession of Gideon. He blew a ram's horn as a call to arms, and the men came to him. Well, why did the Spirit of the Lord take possession of Gideon? Because he had pulled down the images. The images are not God. God is God. There is only one creation, thus there is only one Creator. And that Creator is infinitely interested in his creation, which would include you and me and Gideon. And once we sweep aside the images and the patterns and the isms, what happens in verse 14? The Ruach Yahweh took possession of Gideon, the actual living presence of God. Now, Gideon still, even with the Spirit of God, was himself. He was a doubter. He was pessimistic. So God worked with him. He says, hey, I'm going to put out a fleece. And that's basically skin, animal skin with wool on it. puts it out and says, if this is really of you, God, I want to see this all wet by morning, and I want to see this all dry the next day, or vice versa, whatever. He does it two different ways just to kind of get a fleece. And you've heard the phrase, I'm going to put out a fleece on that. Now, this is not an example for us to keep. It's not like we have to do that. It's that the point of this is that God works with you and with me the way we are. He doesn't work with us the way we could be. And so he understands that Gideon needs this kind of thing. And so he works with him. And then just showing off, God says, hey, let's cut down the troops from full strength to part of that, just so you can see that you can do this with a small number of troops. And I'd like you to read the rest of the story. It's pretty exciting. But I think the key to the story is often missed. And the key to the story is to sweep aside our images of God so that we can receive the true strength of God. Then the Spirit of the Lord took possession of Gideon, and he blew the ram's horn. And all kinds of great things happened in the story. And the shout went out, a sword for the Lord and Gideon. And only 300 men, with 300 men I will rescue you and give you victory over the Midianites. And sure enough, victory was had. And it's a beautiful thing when we get victory. I believe that you are destined to get victory over your biggest fears. And I believe that your biggest fears might be the doorway to your biggest upgrade. So lay aside the preconceived notions you have of how things are. Trust a living relationship with your Creator. And let the Ruach Yahweh, the Spirit of the Lord, rest upon you. And be yourself. Don't pretend that you are something you aren't. Be yourself. God can deal with that. And God will deal with you as he did with Gideon and the fleece. But your destiny, just as Gideon's destiny was, is victory. Accept no substitutes. Well, that's all for today on Life and Liberty Radio. Thanks so much for sharing this part of your spiritual journey with me. Now, the views on this program are not necessarily those of my advertisers, sponsors, places I work or do business with. They're purely my own, but I'm sharing them with you, so share your ideas with me. Write me on Twitter at Liberty House, LIBERTYHOUS, no E. Until next time, let's continue dreaming and working for a free and spiritually grounded society.